Well, back in 2014, there was a church in Houston, Texas called Lakewood Church. It's like a mega of mega churches, and they're doing some renovations. And a plumber busts out a wall, and behind the sheetrock, he finds over $6,000 that have been stowed away in that wall. And he's like, what in the world is this? Right? And so the story goes that one day they were collecting the offering, and mysteriously $6,000 disappeared. Someone was trying to steal it, and they somehow got it behind sheetrock, patched the hole, and covered it up in a way that no one knew. Who knows what happened? But all that to say, if you went to that church, it would be reasonable to say, like, hey, should we get some better systems in place when it comes to collecting up tithes and offerings to make sure that what we give is actually going to the ministry that we want to support? Well, I say that because today we're going to get real practical when it comes to money with what Paul's writing about. So if you're newish to Redeemer, this summer we've been working through 2 Corinthians chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Well, kind of contextually what's going on is there are Christians in Jerusalem at the time of this letter who are hurting. Paul refers to them as saints. They're Christians in Jerusalem who are going through the ringer. So a year prior to Paul writing 2 Corinthians, the churches in Corinth raised up and said, hey, if they're in need, we'll meet that need. What do they need? Let's raise support. Let's get money to them. Let's help hurting Christians in another town, right? Well, word of the Corinthians' generosity gets all the way to a place called Macedonia, all right? Macedonia is where Paul is writing from. It's where churches like Philippi and Thessalonica and Berea are. And so word gets back to these churches that, hey, the Corinthians are so generous. They're raising support to help Christians in another place. And so the Macedonians, who were broke as a joke, I mean, we're talking there rock bottom poverty, they go, hey, if the Corinthians are giving sacrificially, we too want to give sacrificially, right? Now, what Paul reveals is to us, is he goes, hey, the issue is the Macedonians have raised up and given money, but hey, Corinthians, you guys said you would give, but you haven't given a dime, or you haven't brought to completion what you said you would give. So in chapter 8, verses 1 through 15, Paul is encouraging the Corinthians to get back on track with their generosity. And what he does is he unpacks the reason we give theologically. He basically says, look, our giving should not be out of guilt. Our giving should be out of desire, out of passion, because we give out of response to the gospel. He goes, look, when it comes to your tithes and your offerings, when it comes to giving above and beyond, we look to Jesus. And when we look to Jesus and see that he who was rich, that he became poor, that through his poverty, we might become rich, that when we think about that generosity of God towards us, that Jesus didn't just give 10% of his life, but gave 100% of it, that has an effect on us where we open our hands and say, if God's given us everything, we can give too, right? So he's like, hey, theologically, this is why we give. It's in response to God's grace. So that's verses 1 through 15. We're going to pick up in verse 16 today. And so what happens is he shifts from giving a theological reason for giving to getting real practical on how money should be handled, right? And so what he's going to do is he's going to show us this 3-man delegation that he puts together to show integrity with the handling of God's money. And what I want to do is I want to work through this chapter verse by verse, and then I want to come back at the very end and just give 3 application points, something we can learn from each man in this 3-man delegation. So let's jump in verse 16. Paul writes, but thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same earnest care I have for you. For he not only accepted our appeal, but being himself very earnest, he is going to you of his own accord. Right? And so what's happening here is Paul is talking to Christians in Macedonia, and he says, hey, I need someone to go to Corinth and to collect money. Right? He's like, I need someone to go and collect money. And when we see the first guy that rises up is this man named Titus. And he's like, hey, Titus goes. And Titus raises his hand for this appeal, not because Paul was twisting his arm, but because God stirred his heart. It says God put into Titus's heart this earnest care. And so because God stirs his heart, Titus goes, hey, I'm in. right? When it says that he went on his own accord, that means he doesn't go because of guilt or obligation, but because of desire. And when it says that he was earnest, that means he had a passion, he had a zeal. He was like, man, not only will I go, but I want to go and do this. Now, I think about if you were to come to Redeemer's offices on a Tuesday, you would find us in our staff and our service planning meeting, right? So on Tuesdays, we plan out Sunday services, all the details like, hey, what's the first song going to be? Who's the team? Who's playing? Like who's going to pray? Who's going to do a call to worship? Who's going to do announcements? Are you going to make a root beer float or not? Like we go through all of the details, but we're like, I promise you, without fail, every time when I say, hey, who will do announcements this week? It goes silent. People are like, don't make eye contact with Jeff because I don't want to be the person that gets stuck with it. Or they start pointing at fingers like, you do it, you do it. No one is like, I would love to do announcements this week because it's really weird being in front of people in a circle. So those people go like, this is awkward. I don't want to be up there in front of people. I have back insecurity. Like, I don't know. And so people don't want to do it. So why in the world, when you think about like, if announcements are hard for people to say, I'll do it, how much harder would it be to say, go collect money? Right? Like who in the world would raise their hand at the opportunity to go collect money from people that don't want to give it, right? Titus, though, he's passionate about this. Like he has this earnest zeal to go and do it because he truly believes that when you participate in funding gospel ministry, that it comes with a blessing from God. And he's like, man, like I'm going to collect money that gives people an opportunity to give towards kingdom work. And if people give to kingdom work, I know that it's going to come with the kingdom blessing. And so he sees it as an opportunity to give people, he sees it as a way to give people an opportunity to experience God's blessing. And so he is passionate about going for this task. All right, so the first person we meet in this three-man delegation is Titus, who is longing to go and collect the money because he wants people to have an opportunity to experience kingdom blessing. All right, let's pick up in verse 19. He says, and not only that, or verse 18, he says, with him, so with Titus, we are sending the brother who is famous among all the churches for his preaching the gospel. And not only that, but he has been appointed by the churches to travel with us as we carry out this act of grace that is being ministered by us for the glory of the Lord himself and to show our good will. Right? So the first guy that goes on this delegation is Titus. The second person with him is an anonymous guy who's known as being a gospel preacher, right? So the second guy that goes is a man who's known for being a gospel preacher, right? It says that he was appointed by the churches. And that's interesting because Paul was an apostle. He could have just said, I'm appointing you. You're going to go, preacher man. But instead, he goes, hey, I'm going to lend my apostolic authority to the churches so they can take a vote. So the churches go, hey, who should we send? Who should we get that we trust? And they're like, man, preacher boy. Like, let's send the guy who's famous for preaching the gospel. So I don't know what you're known for, right? I don't know what your reputation is. Maybe some of you are known for being great storytellers. Maybe some of you are like this coffee snob in your group, or you're the fashionista, the person who's got the style, or maybe you're just the fanatic, the person who's like over the top Tennessee fan. I don't know what you're known for, right? But this guy was known for what? Being someone who is a gospel preacher. I mean, like, I would love to be known for that. Instead, I'm known as the guy who gets tongue-tied on Sundays, who can't say eternal return on investment, but says returnal, which isn't even a word. Like if you're here last week, I was like an idiot up here, right? Like I'm going, I can't even speak. And like, what's Jeff known for? He can't speak well, right? That's me. This guy is the gospel preacher. But here's the deal. What is he going to do? To collect money. His reputation isn't the guy who has a double major in finance and accounting. His reputation isn't that he's a CFP. His reputation is that he is a preacher of the gospel. So why is that type of person important in this delegation? I can think of two reasons. One is I think about for a couple of years, I was the president of the booster club of my kids' elementary school, right? And so the booster club, our job is to raise money so that our kids don't have to go knock on doors and sell popcorn, right? Now, when parents and grandparents give money to our school, to the booster club to be used, here's what they're doing. They're giving money that they want to be used to benefit their kids, right? Their goal is like, hey, you should hold on to this money for 6 years until my kid is out of school and then bless a future generation. No, no, I'm giving this money because I want it to be used for my kids to benefit the school while my kids are present, right? But when you have a booster club group, you have two types of people. You have savers and spenders, right? Savers are like, hey, we should keep as much back as possible because you don't know when there's going to be a rainy day. Spenders, on the other hand, are going, let's just blow it all. Like, what do you want to give money to? Let's do that, right? And so when it comes to churches, here's the deal. I'm not anti-savings. Like there's a lot of wisdom for churches to have money in reserves. But the truth is people are giving money oftentimes to see ministry happen, right? And so if you have a church board, you're going to have some people who are savers. Hey, let's make sure we're good for a rainy day. And you're going to have other people that are spenders. Let's just spend it all, right? When you have a gospel-minded person, what they're doing is they're saying, hey, we want to make sure that we're responsible with money. So I'm not anti-savings, but we need to be spending money to make sure that it helps people to know Jesus, right? So this guy was most likely an evangelist. He most likely had just this unbreakable burden for the lost, and having someone like him on this team assures that the money given is going to be spent towards helping other people come to know Christ. So I think you need these types of people that will keep you gospel focused. But a second reason why a guy like this is good on the team, and probably the primary reason why they put him on there, is if you ever detach the gospel from your giving, what you have is philanthropy, not Christ-centered generosity. Right? And so a guy like him is going to make sure that the gospel is continually being applied to people's lives. And so as he goes to collect money, if he's applying the gospel, he's making sure that people are giving not out of guilt or obligation, but people are giving in response to the radical generosity of Christ towards them. And so you need these types of people that can help apply the gospel to every area of your life, which in this case includes your finances or your checkbook. And so you have a guy who's able to apply the gospel to the gifts that are being collected. All right. Then one of the things that stands out to me here is when Paul talks about why they're collecting this money, he says they're doing it for the glory of the Lord, right? For the glory of the Lord. Like, let me explain something real quick. When I think about worship teams, I'm going to tie this into what they're doing here. When I think about worship teams, right, I can't help but to think of font, right? For instance, let's say you pick up a book to read, and the font that it's written in is Times New Roman size 12. Most of you probably never think about that. You're not like, oh, this is an interesting font to use today, right? Because it's letters that fade away. But if you're reading a book and all of a sudden a word is italicized or put in bold, your attention is drawn towards that word. You're like, all of a sudden you're seeing the font, you're seeing the italicizedness, you're seeing the boldness of it, right? I say that because some worship teams are like italicized words or bold words. They draw attention to themselves, right? Like you see a worship team and everyone's like, they're like, look at that drummer. And he's just like really big, like boom, hitting the cymbals. And the guitarist is like, just going for it. Like, this is me rocking out. All right. And all of a sudden you're like, man, look at that worship person, right? They're drawing attention to themselves. But a good worship team is not like a bold letter or italicized letter. A good worship team is like basic Times New Roman size 12 font, because what font should do is fade into the background and point beyond itself. A good worship team doesn't point to themselves. They fade into the background, point beyond themselves to something greater, which is Jesus Christ. I love that that's what we have on a weekly basis with our worship teams. Our worship teams fade into the background and point us to Jesus. Why? Because they worship for the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ. So when Paul says they're doing this for the glory of the Lord, he's saying we're doing this not to draw attention to ourselves. He's saying we're doing this because we want to fade into the background and we want to point you to something greater. We want to point you to Jesus. So I love the heart that they have. Their heart is not to make much of themselves, but to make much of Jesus. All right, so we've got Titus, we've got preacher man. Let's keep going in verse 20. He says, we take this course so that no one should blame us about this generous gift that is being administered by us. For we aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man. And so what he's saying here is he's recognizing something. Paul is recognizing that people get funny when you start talking about finances, right? It gets a little awkward when you start talking about money. And so knowing that, he's like, man, we want we want to we want to be above board, right? We want to put safeguards in place to be above board, not just before God, but before others. And the reason he wants to be above board is he knows that we live in a world where so many people have been burned by religious leaders misusing funds. Right? There's an organization called the ACFE. It's the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. This is mind-blowing, okay? So the last study that the ACFE did on churches was in 2023, and here's what they discovered. If you look at the amount of money given globally to ministries, right? So to ministries that are serving the purpose of saying they're trying to advance the kingdom of God or to help people know Jesus, if you look at the amount of money given globally to ministries, 6.6% was either lost by fraud or misappropriation. 6.6%. And maybe you're thinking that doesn't sound like a ton. Let me put that in perspective. The amount of money given globally, 6.6% is over $62 billion lost, right? Like we live in a world where people are like, I don't know if I can trust this organization. And the truth is, if you're like, man, I don't feel comfortable writing this check to this particular ministry, maybe that's a good thing because you should make sure that they're actually being honest and having integrity with their finances. And so Paul, knowing that, hey, we have people who misuse money or are fraudulent, let's make sure we're doing things above board. He's like, hey, we are making sure that we have systems in place to make sure this money is spent rightly. We don't want to be misappropriating funds. We don't want to be fraudulent. We want to be as honest as possible. So here Paul is saying we want to be above board before God and before man, right? Because here's what he knows. He knows that transparency breeds trust, and he wants people to be able to trust them with finances, right? Because fights and accusations about money can kill gospel ministry about as quick as anything, right? And so he's like, man, we need to have safeguards in place, not because I think anybody's shady, but because the gospel demands integrity, right? We'll come back to integrity later. Look at verses 22. He says, and with them, right, with them being Titus and the preacher man, and with them, we are sending our brother, whom we have often tested and found earnest in many matters, but who is now more earnest than ever because of his great confidence in you. And so the third guy, anonymous man number 2, is a man who has been tested. So I'm going to give you guys some tips. Let's say our younger people. If you're in college or you're a young adult and you're applying for a job, here's a great tip. When you're being interviewed, don't speak in hypotheticals, right? What I mean by that, if someone says, tell me a time when you did this, or tell me how you would handle this situation, don't say, well, if I was in that situation, here's what I think I would do, right? That's a hypothetical. Tell them what you've actually done. Give an example of what you've done, because people who are hiring you are not hiring a hypothetical. They want to hire someone who has been there and done that. And so when it says that this anonymous guy has been tested, he's saying he's not a guy who's hypothetically trustworthy. He is a guy who has a track record of being a man of his word. So he's like, man, he is tested. He has a track record of honesty. And what I love about this guy is he says he was more earnest than ever. Not just earnest, but more earnest than ever. And why that stands out is if you study the Corinthians were not easy to love. They weren't people you're like, man, that's a really easy person to love. This makes me think of youth ministry, all right? If you're in youth ministry and you volunteer, right? You're like, hey, I want to serve our students. Here's what the typical person who wants to serve in youth ministry does. They cross their fingers and they're like, please give me high school, please give me high school, please give me high school, right? But imagine this. Let's say someone comes to Brian, our youth minister, and says, hey, I would love to serve middle school students. You're like, what? Like, did I hear you right? Did you say middle school students? Like, yes, I have a passion. I'm more earnest than ever for middle school students. You'd be like, that makes no sense. So you find that volunteer, you hold on to them. You cherish them. You never let them go, because that's not normal, right? Like that's what, like the Corinthians, loving the Corinthians was not an easy thing to do. This isn't normal, but this guy's like, man, I'm passionate about the Corinthians. I want to help them. And so I think this is interesting. Like this guy's more earnest than ever. So this is the type of guy you hold on to. But look at verses 23 and 24. He says, as for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker for your benefit. And as for our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. Then he says this, so give proof before the churches of your love and of our boasting about you to these men. And so what he's saying here, when he talks about giving proof, is he's saying, hey, prove us right. Prove us right because we went out on a limb and said you would come through. So don't make us look like fools. Prove us right. But more importantly, he says, prove yourself right. Don't be people who just say you care. Show that you care by your actions. Like, hey, prove us right. But more importantly, prove yourself right. And we're going to unpack verses 1-5 in chapter 9 too. He says, now it would be superfluous for me to write to you about the ministry for the saints. For I know your readiness, of which I boast about you to the people of Macedonia, saying that Achaia, or one of the churches in Corinth, has been ready since last year, and your zeal has stirred up most of them. Right? And so what he's saying here is, hey, the pledges you made a year ago were super encouraging to the Macedonian Christians. What he's saying here is, hey, your generosity was actually contagious. And this is something important for us to know. When you look at how their generosity was contagious for others, you need to know that your obedience often has a way of stirring the faith of other people, right? And that's what we're seeing with these churches. Your obedience often has a way of stirring the faith of other people. That's why I love baptism. Like I love baptism Sundays because oftentimes it's someone taking that step of obedience that stirs the faith in someone else to take that step of obedience. Like you'll have people in this room who have been coming to church for a season upon season upon season, and they're 98% there. They're like, I feel like Jesus is real. I really want to give my life to him. I'm just not sure. And they're sitting there, and then they see someone get baptized, and that person has their story read, and that person sitting there who's been here for months or years or decades, that's never taken a step. They're like, that's me. Their story is my story. And all of a sudden, there's something about your obedience in baptism that stirred their faith, and that's what enables them to then take that step for themselves. So if you're on the fence about getting baptized, take that step of obedience because it will oftentimes stir someone else's faith for them to take that step of obedience too. And so what we're seeing here with their generosity is he's saying, hey, your generosity, right? It was stirring the obedience and the faith of other Christians. So he's encouraging them here. All right, then look at verses 3 and 4. He says, but I am sending the brothers so that our boasting about you may not prove empty in this matter, so that you may be ready as I said you would be. Otherwise, if some Macedonians come with me and find that you are not ready, we would be humiliated, to say nothing of you for being so confident, right? And so he's basically saying, like, don't make me look dumb, right? Like I would be humiliated. And we think about humiliation in ancient Greek culture. If you defaulted on a loan, they would actually take your name or your face and post it in a public square, right? Imagine this. Imagine you go to Texas Roadhouse and you have your meal, and then they swipe your debit card and it gets denied, and you're like, this is awkward. Like, I will come back and pay this bill. And I don't know how that works. But let's say they let you, like, all right, you can go home and get your money. And you come back and they've got your face on the wall and it's like broke as a joke. You'd be like, that's embarrassing. Like, my face is on the wall because I didn't pay the bill, but I'm here to pay the bill. Like, their goal was public humiliation. So Paul in this culture is like, man, don't humiliate me, right? He's like, because if the Macedonians show up and like in your like pledges stirred their hearts to give, and it turns out you didn't give, he's like, that'd be ridiculous. So Matt, like, think about it like this. Let's say that there's a band coming to town, and you're a big music fan. You're like, there's no way so-and-so is coming to town, right? And so you're telling your friends, like, hey, we should go to this concert. It's going to be great. And your friends are like, are you going to this concert? And they say, yes. And so your friends hop on, HubStub, wherever you buy concert tickets, and they get tickets to the concert, and they're pumped now because you told them about this show. And then the day comes, and like, do you want to get dinner before the show? And you're like, what show? They're like, the concert that you told us about. Like, oh yeah, we didn't buy tickets. You'd go, what? Like, we bought tickets because you said you were buying tickets, and we bought the tickets, and now you didn't buy the tickets. You'd feel like you got left out to dry, right? That's what he's saying. If the Macedonians come here and they've given sacrificially, and you're like, hey, how much did you give? And you go 0, they're going to go, what? Like, the only reason we were stirred to generosity is because you said you were going to be generous and you weren't generous and we were. Like, this makes no sense. And so Paul is basically raising this kind of, or painting this picture for the Corinthians to say, like, don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass me, right? And then look at verse 5. He says, so I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to go on ahead to you and arrange in advance for the gift you have promised. So notice, like, they promised this gift so that it may be ready as a willing gift, not as an exation, right? A willing gift or an exation. So in verse 5, he's showing like, hey, you promised to give this money, and I'm going to get it in one of two ways. I'm either going to get it from you where you willingly give it, or I'm going to get it from you as an exation, right? So if you're to give willingly, that means you're giving in a positive way. You're like, man, like this has a positive feel. And the only way that giving will ever be positive is if your giving is something that's prayerfully planned, right? That if your giving is in response to experiencing God's grace in your life. Because if you truly believe that God's grace is in your life, if you truly trust in the sufficiency of his grace for your future, you're able to hold your stuff with an open hand. So he said, man, my hope is that you give willingly. But the idea of an exation is not positive, but negative. You're giving because you have to, right? It's like they're prying your hands open because you're a stingy person, right? When people give because they have to, the truth is they want to hold on to as much of their stuff as possible, either for self-gratification. It's like, this is about me. I earned this. I deserve this. Or they want to do so because they just don't trust God for their future. They don't trust in the sufficiency of God's grace for their future. So it's saying we've got to hold on to this because this is our security. And so Paul's like, man, I don't want you guys to give because you feel embarrassed. I want you to give because you've experienced God's blessing. So I'm going to send them before me to explain the gospel to you again. And my hope is that when I get there, this is something you've given because you wanted to, not because you have to. Right? So if we look at these verses, chapter 8, verse 16 through chapter 9, verse 5, what's the big idea? Right? I think the main point of this text is that God's grace inspires integrity around the way ministries handle money. Right? God's grace inspires integrity around the way that ministries handle money, right? And because distrust when it comes to finances derails ministry, but financial integrity helps to advance God's kingdom, right? So that's kind of the big idea, and I'm not sure how much you guys want to hear about Redeemer and how we do money. So what I'm going to do, I would say like we're an open book. Integrity, right? Talk to Jeff Lilly. Jeff Lilly has literally combed through every dollar that has come into Redeemer over the last year and made sure that it's been stewarded properly, right? Like this is something we care deeply about. But what I want to do is I want to kind of come back to these three guys, Titus, the preacher man, and the tested man. I want to what are some things we can learn from them? All right, so the first guy, Titus. What I love about Titus is that God stirred his heart. Right? Like he raised his hand to go to Corinth and collect money because God put this passion in his heart. Right? So here's what I would love for you to do. I would love for you to serve God's kingdom with passion, with God stirring your heart. So I think this is probably the worst illustration I've given in a while. So give me grace on this. I'm going to get in trouble. But think about the difference between the way men shop and women shop when it comes to clothes. Right? Like this is in generally speaking here. But when a woman goes to the store, it's not an in and out thing. It's like, let me feel the fabric on this. Let me try on 7 different dresses. I'm going to leave 3 of them in the changing room. I'm going to take 5 home with intention of returning 3 if I do so. Right? Like all of a sudden it's like it's just this gallivanting. It's the whole ordeal. You can't put a time on a woman shopping for clothes, right? Like just give them their space, let them roam. But if a man's going to shop, like, what do I need? Jeans? What size? 34, 34. Where's it at? You walk in, grab a pair. You're like, I don't know if these were cut right from the factory or not. I'm just going to trust it. You go, you check out, you go home, in and out on a mission, right? Like maybe you're like, that's not how I shop. That's how I do, right? So all that to say, I wonder how many people So this is a horrible illustration. I, wo- I wonder how many people approach church like women shopping for clothes. You're just kind of aimlessly wandering around, like maybe I'll serve in the children's ministry, try that out. I'll try this on. Maybe I'll do coffee for a little bit. Like I'll try the greeter thing. And you're kind of just aimlessly here, right? Maybe like, I'm just in the bathroom for a really long time. Can I say like, the future building has 7 women's stalls? Can I get an amen for that? You're like just put more in there. Like get the women as many stalls as possible. Because I look back here during the break and I'm like, they're not going to be here for the sermon, right? Um, so you're wandering around the store, you're in the bathroom, whatever it is. But like, if God stirs your heart, all of a sudden you have a mission. It's like, man, like I know exactly what God's called me to do, and I want to be a part of this. And so if you're here, like, man, Jeff, I kind of feel aimless at Redeemer, and I would love to kind of have more of that purpose. Here's what I want you to do: reach out to Kelly Austin. All right. Kelly Austin will present to you opportunity upon opportunity upon opportunity of how you can jump into the life of our church. And then what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of things and your heart's going to do nothing. But there might be something where your heart starts to beat a little faster. And could it be that God is putting something in your heart to give you purpose for why God has you here? Right? And so where is God stirring your heart? It's not for everything, but it is for something. So I think we can learn that from Titus to ask the question, where is God stirring your heart? So that you can have clarity on why you are here, what your mission is. All right, what about the preacher man? I love that the preacher man was not a finance guy, not an accounting guy. He was a gospel guy. All right, this makes me think of back in high school when I was in algebra 2, I got my first massive TI 83 plus calculator. I don't know what they're using now, maybe a TI 87 or something, but back in the day it was a TI 83 plus. And in with that calculator, no color, just two like black and white, I could solve matrices. I could solve equations. I could download games and secretly play them when my teacher wasn't looking. Like I knew that calculator like the back of my hand. I used it in college for calculus and for different economics classes. Like that calculator was something that I mastered, okay? But when I graduated college and moved on to seminary for theological studies, guess what I never used again? I never used that TI 83 plus calculator. I was never like, how do I solve this equation, right? Um, I think a lot of people treat the gospel like I treated my TI 83 calculator. It serves a purpose to get you saved. And once your salvation is secure, you move on from it and never look back. But the truth is the gospel is not something you ever move on from. It's something you continually grow deeper into, right? The gospel is meant to apply to every area of your life. The gospel applies to the way that you work. The gospel applies to the way that you parent. The gospel applies to the way that you approach your studies. The gospel applies to the way that you see your neighborhood. You see, the gospel is something that applies to every single area of your life. It is something that you are called to grow deeper into until you breathe your last breath. And so be a gospel person. Be a person who you're saying like, hey, the gospel is meant to apply to this, and be able to connect the dots and ask, how does the gospel shape this area of my life? And so if you feel like you've moved on from the gospel, I think what we can learn from the anonymous man number 2, or the first anonymous man, is that the gospel is something that you grow deeper into. So don't move on from the gospel, apply it to everything that you do, right? So Titus, we have God stirring his heart. The preacher man, we have growing deeper in the gospel. And then we have the final guy, the tested man. And I think the final guy, what he shows us is there is an importance for Christians to be people that are that have high integrity. Like integrity should be the mark of every Christian. Why? Why is integrity important for Christians? Because being a man or woman of your word reflects who God is. You see, God has kept his promises, so we should keep ours. So if we are people of our word and people can trust us, when we share them the love of Christ, that is the message that they think like, if I can trust them on all these other things, is it reasonable that I could trust them with this too? And so what promises did God keep? You see, Adam and Eve brought sin into the world, and sin has fractured everything. Everything is on a downward spiral, right? Everything is corrupt and not as it is meant to be. But God, seeing this brokenness, said, I'm not going to let that be the final word. I'm going to send my son to step into history to fix everything that's gone wrong. I'm going to send my son into the world to live the perfect life none of them could live, to die the sinner's death that every single one of them deserved, and to raise victoriously from the grave to offer them eternal life, a right relationship with me that will last forever and ever. And God didn't just say that, He saw it through in His Son, Jesus Christ. God has kept His promises, so may we keep ours. And so as we look at this text, we want to be people who are people of integrity with our finances, but with every other area of our life. Let's keep our word because God kept His. God, thank you for your word. And we want to do our best to understand how a text written to a church 2,000 years ago, how it was written to them, but yet it's still for us. And so, God, I ask that you'd be over Redeemer. God, let us be a church that's an open book. Let us be a church that shows financial integrity with everything, that people can trust that whatever they give is going to go towards furthering your kingdom. And God, for people here that are struggling, when it comes to their generosity, God, would you just grip them with your gospel? Would you let them be gripped by the love of Christ, that they would give willingly, not out of guilt or embarrassment, or because they have to, because they want to. And God, I ask that we would be shaped like these people. God, let us be passionate like Titus. Let us apply the gospel like the second guy. And let us be people of integrity like the third. God, because each of those people look like you, and that's who we want to look like too. In your name we pray. Amen.